Hi, this is Cassius Felicella, and you're listening to Homeroom, a podcast dedicated to everything startup related. In this episode, I'm joined by Colin Bramm. Colin is the CEO and co founder of Showbie, a hybrid learning platform designed to make classrooms more interactive. Colin was also part of the Imagine K 12 batch at YC, and we're thrilled to be able to speak with him today. Colin, really appreciate you joining us here. So, to start off, can you tell us the story of Showbie and what problem it's trying to solve?
Yeah, first of all, Cassie, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me on. We at Showbie are building an application that's used by tens of thousands of teachers globally every day. And this application is used for teachers to send assignments to students and for students to be able to complete those digital assignments and for the teacher to easily give feedback to those students. You can think of it a little bit like an Instagram where you're talking to your teacher back and forth until the work is completed, and they have really easy to use tools to mark up that work in real time. So that's what we're building at Showbie. It's all about efficiency and giving better feedback to students and making teachers' lives hopefully less busy.
How did you initially find that need in the market, though? Were there any kinds of interactions between your team and school boards to understand the sector, or maybe even parent teacher associations?
Yeah, we found out about the kind of need because being in Edmonton, Canada, we have a variety of local schools that I used to work with in my former business. I had a consulting company where I was building of our niche there was building online report card software. So working with schools and school districts on that challenge before Showbie, but ended up with one of the schools in that client network back in maybe 2012. They were rolling out iPads in the classrooms, and I was and the need was, how does this report card software work with iPads? And at the time, I was just really, I was curious why they were going to be using iPads. I hadn't seen that setup before. iPads were relatively new at the time, and of course, I'd seen computer labs and the occasional laptop in a classroom to that point, but having the entire class outfitted with iPads was something new. So after learning a little bit about why the school was looking at this, trying something new, it was all about engaging students in learning and also kind of making a shift from students just completing, static assignments or tests to, actually having them like film and create multimedia presentations around their learning. So it's very project-based learning, and they wanted to use the devices to capture that process, that project work. And so, big challenge that arose for them was just, where do I store that digital work? Is it in the cloud, or do I need a server in the school to do this? And so, the first version of Showbie to address that challenge was really to be a Dropbox for the classroom, a digital file repository, and have some features where the teacher could have a view on the web where they could see all that work that was flowing in from each student's device. And it ended up being a hit. It solved a real need. And over time, we've layered on a variety of other capabilities, communication capabilities, and created a much richer app experience around that core workflow. So that's how it all started, was just with a little lone school in Edmonton, Canada. And it turns out many other schools over the last decade have gone this direction, either with iPads or Chromebooks or other types of devices in students learning.
And how exactly did you end up iterating that idea?
Prior to Showbie being its own company, as I mentioned, I kind of had this consulting business. So that consisted of about a dozen people. We were software developers and a few kind of sales and support people that were building software for school districts. And it was in the latter years of that company where I was really focused on kind of changing the business model from being more bill by hour type of consulting work, building custom software and services, to I'd really started to learn more about software as a service and cloud-based products. Of course, at that time, there was products like Twitter and Facebook that were around the internet, fully established, and industry software like Salesforce or Zendesk. And so I, I really wanted to find a way that we could have more predictable revenue in the consulting business because bill by hour was very feast or famine. And it was inside the consulting customer base that we began to explore for new product ideas. We didn't vary too far from education in exploring what were some products we could invest in. But literally, for the last couple of years of the consulting business, I invested all of the profit in building new products, new startup kind of products that I thought could take off. And early on, the process was I would think about a problem myself and try to invent this with a team. But actually, that didn't work out as well as I thought. We would over-engineer a solution before we really validated it. And I remember there was a key point where I read a book called The Lean Startup, and it kind of talked all about minimum viable products and maybe building more towards evolving something and scaling it out once you have validation that you're onto something. And so a big thing for me was after 1 or 2 years of building other products other than Showbie, and there was more than one experiment at the time that we invested in. But Showbie became a hit because we actually went into this real classroom. I saw that there was a different platform that they were engaged with. It wasn't. It was completely new. This environmental change with iPads in the classroom, and there was a host of problems to be solved there. And so it wasn't something I invented. Rather, it was just really listening to the educators who were using those iPads and hearing about the pains of it, the challenges, and then based on that, being able to kind of craft a prototype that we put together in a matter of weeks or a month, rather than spending all this time to build something monolithic, building something very simple that in its early form would be completely embarrassing to normally put in front of a customer. They used it. They consistently used it. We could see that not only did they say they were going to love using it, educators are very nice people, and sometimes they'll say, regardless of what we build, they'll say, this is great. It's going to change my life. But the real proof in the pudding is, do they use it a week or a month later? And they did with this. And some lucky breaks were, for example, having someone from Apple actually come into that school to do, I presume, a check-in call kind of on how the iPad rollout was doing. And they saw our product being used there. And very quickly, we kind of entered a discussion to visit other schools that were similar to this. And that's where things really started to take off from the ground.
So what was that like then? I mean, very few people will ever have the opportunity to pitch Apple or even get invited to their offices.
It was really, really exciting. I think, Apple's a global company, obviously, one of the biggest companies in the world. And being from Edmonton and really having my head down in my work for nearly a decade at this point, there's kind of a divide between, working with clients. And then, of course, you kind of have these visions of bigger companies that are doing really interesting things in the world. And so, I wouldn't say Apple came formally calling on Showbie, but rather we organically began to become introduced to various members of their global sales team very quickly, who were also, it turns out, in parallel, implementing iPads in classrooms around the world. And so within a matter of weeks in 2012, we went from this one school in Edmonton to when the iron is hot, you strike. And I was in New York a few weeks later with very similar schools investing in Apple technology in some of their schools there, showing them Showbie. Those customers immediately started using the product, and we kind of went from just this tiny little footprint of use locally in Edmonton to the spread that happened, and kind of this really cool validation that maybe we're onto something here. Maybe we're not doing something that's so unique to just one school. And it ended up crescendoing to about 6 months later, actually getting to meet with the education team in Cupertino, who is sort of managing the U.S. Education sales force. And this problem that we'd honed in on was actually more than just a problem for that one school in Edmonton. It was a problem, it seemed, across the entire customer base, where all customers who were purchasing iPads had this vision to use it as really a project evidence kind of device and an engagement tool, but they were being hindered by this simple capability, a plumbing problem, an infrastructure problem. How do we manage files in a group setting? How do I get this to the teachers so it's not a logistical nightmare for teachers to actually review students' work? And so we were solving a real problem. The conversations with Apple didn't really go anywhere. Obviously, we're still a private company today, but the heat of that kind of organic interest in Showbie and these visits to key customers and meeting with Apple, all helped to instill this confidence in myself and my co-founder Roy, who is someone I've been working with for now 15 plus years. He and I were working in the consulting business together. He was the very first person I hired. He's definitely the technical brains behind the operation, so we work incredibly well together. And we were both very excited to see this traction on what a couple of years prior, just sort of investing in random startup product ideas had led to very little. Now we were getting real traction in the world.